The next item on our agenda is once again on behalf of the Vice President of the Commission and the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. It's a statement on Ukraine. And on behalf of the High Representative, I would like to call the Commissioner, Mr. Füle.
Thank you, Mr. President and honourable members, Madam Minister. There are many challenges on Ukraine's road towards political association and economic integration with the European Union. We remain firmly engaged to developing relations with Ukraine, no doubt about that. But we cannot realise the full potential of our relations yet. At the December Foreign Affairs Council 2 days ago, the Council adopted conclusions on Ukraine which confirmed a sequenced policy of engagement. High Representative and Vice President Ashton called Ukrainian Prime Minister Azarov yesterday to explain these conclusions. The point she made was about a clear message to Ukraine on the elements for the way ahead, on what needs to be done and on what is at stake. The conclusions set out a number of concrete benchmarks. These will be the basis upon which the European Union will assess Ukraine's progress in the three areas already defined as necessary for opening the way for the signature of the Association Agreement. Let me underline that we are not imposing additional hurdles. But at the same time, we are not compromising on our values. I mentioned the three areas where we expect progress from Ukraine. The first of these was the compliance of the 2012 parliamentary elections with international standards and follow-up actions to remedy any shortcomings. The second was Ukraine's progress in addressing the issue of selective justice and preventing its recurrence. And the third was action to implement the reforms defined in the jointly agreed association agenda. Let me say a few words about how the European Union sees developments in these three areas. As regards the recent parliamentary elections, and elections being the first criteria, the European Union notes with concern that they presented a mixed picture and a deterioration in several areas compared to standards previously achieved. Looking to the final report by the OSCE ODIHR, it is essential that Ukraine takes early action to fully implement its recommendations and to address the shortcomings. The European Union has taken good note of the public commitments made by the Prime Minister of Ukraine in the aftermath of the elections. While these commitments were encouraging, we now look forward to seeing real and concrete steps to bring them to fruition. We have already indicated that for us the top priorities are a reliable electoral system based on electoral code and clear rules on balanced media access for electoral competitors. We will also follow closely how the inclusive results in the 5 single-mandate electoral constituencies will be addressed. As regards selective justice, the second criteria, the European Union's long-standing concern on this matter, the case of Ms Tymoshenko and other members of the former government, such as Mr Lutsenko, has so far not received the kind of answer we need. In other words, a strategic approach to systemically tackle this issue. We also regret that the 2 key opposition leaders were prevented from standing in the parliamentary elections. The recent final judgment of the European Court of Human Rights on the unlawful and arbitrary detention of Yuri Lutsenko has also confirmed our concerns. There are other cases pending before the court. We expect the Ukrainian authorities to express a clear commitment to the early implementation of all judgments of the European Court on Human Rights, as well as a recommendation by the Council of Europe related to detention conditions and medical assistance to persons in detention. Let me in this context commend the efforts of the European Parliament's Monitoring Commission to Ukraine, headed by former Presidents Cox and Kwasniewski, which we hope will continue. This mission has a vital role to play in addressing the cases I have mentioned and in encouraging Ukraine to take further steps to reform the judiciary and to prevent any recurrence of the injustice we have seen. The European Union has repeatedly highlighted that the judiciary in Ukraine is suffering from a systemic problem which will require a systemic solution in the form of comprehensive judicial reform. We have welcomed the steps already taken, such as the entry into force of the new Criminal Procedure Code, the new legislation on the bar, and the establishment of a national preventive mechanism against torture. Naturally, we look forward to their effective implementation. Further steps on judicial reform in close consultation with the Council of Europe and the Venice Commission are much needed, including a comprehensive review of the law on the functioning of the Prosecutor's Office and of the Criminal Code. The role of the High Council of Justice also needs to be reviewed, and serious consideration needs to be given to reform of the police. The European Union and Ukraine, with the participation of the Council of Europe, will soon launch an informal dialogue on judicial reform to facilitate Ukraine's progress on these matters. The third criterion is the Association Agenda. This is an instrument jointly agreed with Ukraine in 2009, preparing for and facilitating the entry into force of the Association Agreement and its deep and comprehensive free trade area. Issues such as electoral and judicial reforms are among its commonly agreed priorities, and it addresses constitutional reform too. This is essential for creating the necessary interinstitutional checks and balances to continue modernisation and deepen democracy. Apart from these political reforms, we will also pay particular attention to the business and investment climate and to those areas where sustained efforts are required to enable us to support Ukraine through financial assistance. The European Union is also ready to assist Ukraine through an informal dialogue on the business climate. All these reforms are very important for Ukraine. What we want to see in Ukraine is an inclusive process through constructive engagement between government, parliamentary opposition and civil society. Honourable Members, let me assure you that the High Representative, together with the Commission, will monitor progress achieved in the three areas I have mentioned, notably in the framework of the preparations for the upcoming European Union-Ukraine Summit, the 2013 European Union-Ukraine Cooperation Council, and the November 2013 Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius. The Council, in the conclusions adopted on Monday, reaffirmed its commitment to the signing of the Association Agreement, including the DCFTA, as soon as Ukraine demonstrates determined action and tangible progress in the three areas I have recalled, possibly by the time of the Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius in November 2013. The signature could be accompanied by opening for provisional application of parts of the agreement. This is a very ambitious enabling framework for advancing relations between the European Union and Ukraine, combining concrete steps with a concrete time perspective for possible signature. I hope this will provide the needed impetus for Ukraine to build the necessary momentum for reform. Without it, we will not meet our goal. Our political dialogue with Ukraine will continue at all levels. The modernisation of Ukraine can benefit from European Union bilateral financial assistance and potentially macro-financial assistance as well, and we will continue our efforts to facilitate support from the international financial institutions for the modernisation of the Ukrainian gas transmission system in accordance with the existing agreements, including the Energy Community Treaty. The Action Plan on Visa Liberalisation is another very important instrument in our relations, and we encourage Ukraine to increase its efforts towards meeting the first phase benchmarks. And finally, I hope that the European Parliament will soon consider the amendments to the Visa Facilitation Agreement, which we signed with Ukraine in July this year. This will further facilitate the issuance of visas to Ukrainian citizens. Someone could still wonder whether such a sequenced policy of engagement with Ukraine would serve our longer-term objectives. I have no doubt in that respect. On the one hand, we are neither compromising on our values nor imposing additional criteria to Ukraine. But at the same time, we want to confirm with Ukraine its strategic choice for the political association and economic integration with the European Union. Therefore, the association agreement is not a moving target. This policy allows us to work towards that end in a sequenced way. Ukraine will have our support in order to deviate from its choice, not to deviate from its choice for long-term modernity and highest political and legal standards. The perspective of signature and provisional application of the association agreement should provide an important motivation. To sum up, the ball is clearly in Ukraine's court. If it wants to score by the time of the Eastern Partnership Summit, it needs to play well and keep an eye on the clock. The European Union is sincere about the wish to go ahead, but there will be hardly any signature if progress on the benchmark is insufficient. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. In the name of the European People's Party, Elmar BROK has the floor.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. I think that the Eastern Partnership project is entering into a difficult phase, particularly with developing countries, and we hope that we can give out a clear signal to the Ukraine after these elections that have taken place with electoral fraud and with imprisonment of opposition politicians. This is not the clear signal that we need from the Ukraine. However, it is clear that it is in the interest of Europe and the Ukrainian people that our relations improve. These relations need to be strengthened in an economic and social strategic interest for the people. And we are open to this possibility. We have to show that. We can't show the Ukrainians that we are closed to an improvement of relations. In the Eastern Partnership Summit in November 2013, this is culminating to a focal point. Many things have to be regulated before that date, relating to the rule of law, the position of the public prosecutor, the changing of the electoral rules in the country. making sure that the mayor of Kiev and other elected officials are operating effectively. I think all of these are good reasons for us to collaborate in order to come to the right results. I think those who are being imprisoned for political reasons need to be freed, and the European Court of Human Rights has expressed a clear opinion on this. There are many other points that could be brought up. Hopefully these issues can be improved so that we are in a position in November 2013 to get a signed agreement at the Vilnius summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, on behalf of the Socialists and Democrats, I call Mr. ROUČEK.
Köszönöm szépen. President, Commissioner, today we are discussing in a situation in a country of 46 million people, country which has very clever, smart, educated population, country which is of strategic importance both to us and to Russian eastern neighbor. Country where we recognize that Ukraine is a European country, has European identity, which shares common history and common values with the countries of European Union. That's also the reason why we went ahead with the association agreement and with the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. However, there are at least two issues which stand in a way to sign this, both for Ukraine and the EU, very important piece of agreement. The first one, of course, is the case of Yulia Tymoshenko. So we would like to make, on behalf of Socialists and Democrats, strong appeal to the Ukrainian authorities to find, together with the European Parliament envoys Alexander Kwasniewski and Pat Cox, a reasonable and just solution to the Tymoshenko case. And we urge the Ukrainian government to respect and implement the final decisions by the European Court on Human Rights on the ongoing case of Yulia Tymoshenko. Today we discuss also the elections of 28th of October in the Ukraine. There was some progress, but there were also many steps backwards, unfortunately. I don't have time to go into detail. These steps are described in our report. What we welcome is the decision of the Verkhovna Rada to create parliamentary inquiry committee to investigate those problems, and we hope that the Ukrainian authorities, both in the parliament and in the government, will fully implement the recommendation by the OECD ODIHR. Commissioner spoke about three levels, about three conditions. We are fully behind that view, behind that strategy. Yes, we Socialists and Democrats, we wish that we sign in Vilnius at the latest the association and deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. But as has been already said, the ball is on the side of our Ukrainian friends. We hope that together we will make it, because it's important both for the Ukraine and of course for the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Van Baalen now for 2 minutes. On behalf of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats.
I think that many in this House are united. We believe in bringing Ukraine and the European Union closer together. We are committed, like the Commission is committed. Commissioner Füle has our full support. And if we look at the benchmarks, the fact that the OSCE and ODIHR concluded that the elections were a setback, that's a very serious thing. Not progress, but a setback. And how to change this? Ukraine must act, and must act in making an electoral law which is up to European or international standards. It should do so. If we look at the referendum law, that should also be brought to the standards set out by the Commissioner. And look at the law 8711, where those can be prosecuted who speak out on behalf of homosexuals and others. This law should either be repealed by the government or should be voted down by the Rada. There is much to be done, and Ukraine should take the European Union seriously. We reach out our hands, and I think this is the whole House here and the Commission and the Council. It is now up to Ukraine to make a difference, and I agree with both previous speakers. Thank you very much.
Köszönöm szépen.
Thank you very much. And now, on behalf of the Greens European Free Alliance, I call Mrs. Harms.
Honourable President, ladies and gentlemen, I would actually start with a positive note. I was an observer, and I was very worried during those elections because there was a great deal of frustration amongst the citizens of the Ukraine, especially because of what has happened in the past, and therefore we thought that the participation to the election was going to be very low, but almost 60% of the people actually went to the vote in the Ukraine. And I believe that we need to feel committed towards all these many citizens of a neighbouring country who feel that they grant guarantees that Ukraine is walking towards democracy. But of course, negative statements have also been made by Commissioner Füle and by other speakers. You confirmed what we in the International Observers Committee saw in terms of snags in the elections and steps backwards. In the report it was stated that there is a major problem, basic problem, because law is in the hands of the powerful. It is the state that determines the law, and that this basically means that at the moment there is political injustice against Tymoshenko, Yushchenko and others. And this needs to change. This needs to change. That is not a state based on the rule of law. That makes it very difficult for the Ukraine to come closer to the European Union. I'm in favour of this visa agreement. I'm in favour of the association agreement too. But once again, I need to say to all politicians, all the people that I've got to know in the Ukraine, people in government, please remove these barriers so that we can work for the citizens of the Ukraine, particularly now that the Ukraine is being struck by the economic crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now for the European Conservatives and Reformists, I call Mr. Csaba.
Panie Przewodniczący, Panie Komisarzu.
Ladies and gentlemen, Commissioner, several weeks ago your predecessor Mr. Verheugen said that it was a pity that after the Orange Revolution he was unable to offer Ukraine a real proposal. The time is passing, and we are saying today to the Ukrainian government that it's time to solve the problems which Rebecca Harms has indicated with Yulia Tymoshenko and Yuri Lutsenko. But time is also on our side. It is our neighbor and it's our European interest. We cannot lose the time we have in the face of history. Therefore, I thank the Commissioner for such commitment to the issue of Ukraine, and I appeal for very intensive dialogue. This year there was no summit between EU and the Ukraine. There were two summits with Russia. I don't want to compare them, but we cannot address only the government, whether we like it or not. Our partner is the nation, the society, the NGOs and churches. They have shown through the elections how they are interested in Europe. It is not far to their country from Poland, Slovakia and even from Brussels, and we have no right to tell them no or to tell them that they have to wait for many years. Therefore, I appeal to you to reflect once again, what can we offer? Let us sign the association agreement as soon as possible. This will not harm the unjustly imprisoned, it will help our policy. Let us loosen the visa regime. Young people who want to study in Europe, who want to go out and meet Europe, they cannot be confronted by a new Iron Curtain. So I appeal to the deputies and to the Commissioner that you should be able to present a better speech than Günther Verheugen, to have something to say to Kiev. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now the next speaker on my list is Mr. Stadler as a non-attached.
Herr Präsident, Herr Kommissar.
President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, the crucial issue for us is about the elections of the 28th of October, how we assess that. Are we dealing with a parliament that has the intention to reflect the will of the Ukrainian people, yes or no? We've taken note of various shortcomings, and of course it's a matter of how we assess that, but disregarding that, I think basically what we can take note of is that this parliament is one that actually corresponds to the will of the Ukrainian people. If anything, if it were the opposite, I would be the biggest critic of this parliament, but I think that all the exit polls did indicate that the final election result was precisely what had been predicted. So in other words, we are talking about a parliament that has legitimacy, that is legitimate and supported. So yes, there have been notifications of shortcomings. Of course they will be dealt with, and that's precisely why we have international observers. In addition to that, Ukraine is embarking on modernization, and this is supported by the people and also by the government. Ukraine has the will to improve its rule of law, in particular when it comes to criminal procedural law. And I think that there is a genuine will to tackle corruption. And in a way, they've gone further than some member states of the European Union. They're ahead of us in some cases. I wanted to also have that stated clearly. And for that reason, I would say that it makes sense, and I would say that it's in the interest of Europe to push forward with this association agreement. Obviously, we want to make sure that we deal with Ukraine properly. We don't want to make things more difficult for them. If we just talk about Tymoshenko every single time, with the Ukrainians, we'll find that the Ukrainian people have actually far other concerns, not just Mrs. Tymoshenko. I think it's important for us to really bear in mind the importance of this association agreement and the development of Ukraine as a democratic country. Thank you very much. And now the backbenchers. The first one being Mr. GAHLER.
It's very important for us to be active in accompanying further political developments in the Ukraine, and we have an encompassing agenda for political dialogue. All international observers, including Ms. Ashton and acting on behalf of foreign policy of the EU, recognised that things were better this time round than last time. That's what people wanted. The point is that we have to accept that certain political imprisonments are not acceptable, and that we are focusing on improving our possibilities for cooperation with the people of the Ukraine. This will hopefully be possible to improve the situation before November 2013 and the Eastern Partnership Summit, so that we can sign the association agreement. This is not really an ambitious agenda. The political will has to be there on the side of the Ukrainians just to complete what is required in order to sign that agreement. A party such as that led by Mr. Svoboda has brought up criticisms, but there is going to be an oral amendment tomorrow. I call upon you to support that tomorrow in the vote. It adds to the amendments from the socialist side. Mr. Svoboda has no possibility to speak with the equivalents, their counterparties in the Ukraine. And if a genuine party is going to be set up in the Ukraine, it should have no genuine influence on the government unless it sticks to all the rules. Thank you very much.
The next is from Kristian VIGENIN.
Thank you so much, Mr. GAHLER. Next speaker, Mr. VIGENIN.
I think we can all recognize the fact that the current authorities in Ukraine have done a lot to bring the country closer to the EU. But what is lacking is the understanding that coming closer to the EU is not only a technical or legislative process, it is also a matter of values. And exactly at the level of values, the European Parliament would like to see more. The parliamentary elections were a clear expression of this deficiency. Despite the fact that a number of improvements were made as regards legislation and technical organisation of the elections, main concern remained the pre-electoral process, which needs to be significantly improved. My recommendation, however, would be to proceed without delay to the signature of the association agreement, because this is the most effective way to bind Ukraine to the EU, to make visible and hopefully irreversible the clear European choice of the country. To engage is the most effective tool to transform a society which is becoming increasingly vulnerable to populist and nationalistic ideas. We somehow miss to see that a clearly anti-Semite, nationalistic, extreme right party gained the support of 10% of the voters. This party is a test for all others who declare themselves European and pro-democratic. Any cooperation with Svoboda in the Parliament of Ukraine must be excluded. The Socialist Group has made an amendment to the joint resolution in this direction, and I ask my colleagues from all political groups to support it. Again, it's a matter of values. And by the way, I will not support the proposal and the oral amendment of Mr. GAHLER. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are you ready to answer a blue card? I have the impression that the answer is yes. So, Mr. Brok, you have the floor. Mike.
Well, the question that was raised by Mr. GAHLER has been answered. I'd like to hear from you. What's the difference between a left-wing radical anti-democratic forces and then a right-wing radical anti-democratic force? What's the difference between the two? I'd like to hear your analysis.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Brok. I'm not here to defend the left radicals or whoever, but we have seen in this campaign, if you have followed it closely, absolutely unacceptable behaviour of Svoboda party with very clear nationalistic, anti-Semite messages, which I think need to be clearly evaluated by our parliament. On the other side, the Communist Party have not made such statements. In their electoral platform there is no hatred and anti-xenophobic behaviour or ideas. That's why I think we should not mix both parties, Svoboda and the Communist Party. If you have the idea and if you have ideas to make a case out of the possible participation of the Communist Party in the next government, it's a matter of different amendment and different idea. Please do not mix two issues.
TANNOCK is the next speaker.
I welcome the Council's declaration on Ukraine, which recognises the European aspirations of this large strategic country, of which I am very fond of. There is now a clear commitment and political will on both sides to sign an association agreement, and my group, the ECR, would furthermore endorse a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement with this country, which would offer benefits to all parties, and hopefully this can be concluded by November of 2013. Nevertheless, we cannot ignore the legitimate concerns pertaining to Ukraine over human rights matters, in particular the way the executive continues a policy of selective justice which keeps Yulia Tymoshenko in prison and lets others go free. My group therefore once again appeals to President Yanukovych to release her. There were also irregularities in the recent parliamentary elections. However, these were not nearly as significant as some of us had feared. There was no evidence of mass falsification, and the opposition now occupies half of the parliament's seats. So with this somewhat mixed bag, we further encourage and welcome Ukraine's European engagement. The alternative, the Eurasian Union with authoritarian Belarus, Kazakhstan and Russia, would pull the country at large and its talented people in the wrong direction. In my view, Ukraine deserves much better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I call Mr. Adrian SEVERIN for a minute and a half.
Chairman, the Ukrainian dilemma is not about the choice between values and interest. It is about the choice between promoting the Euro-Atlantic interest and Euro-Asian interest. Ukraine is the most important geostrategic asset at the yet unsettled border between the European Union and the emerging Euro-Asian Union. Those who are able to integrate Ukraine in their system will be able to master their security at that border. Ukraine expressed loud and clear its choice for integration in the European Union. To reject Ukraine, irrespective of the reasons or rather pretext formulated to this end, means to betray at the same time our values and our interests. We betray our values by alienating the Ukrainian people, disappointed by our hypocrisy, short-sightedness and unfairness, and by pushing it towards a union which does not cherish our standards. We betray our geostrategic goals because we refuse the benefit of the instruments offered by the already negotiated association agreement in order to bring Ukraine, maybe slowly but steadily, in our union through economic integration, political association and institutional convergence, thus forcing it to become an Euro-Asian outpost at our eastern borders. Let's not fool ourselves. Postponement means refusal. One might say that the ghost of Ribbentrop and Molotov, as well as the geostrategic logic of their infamous pact, hide behind this refusal. Therefore, we must refuse the refusal. Therefore, we must move forward with signing the association agreement with Ukraine right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paweł ZALEWSKI is the next speaker.
Chairman, Mr. Commissioner,
Panie Przewodniczący, Panie Komisarzu.
Is about signing up of association agreement. We usually hear to representatives of authorities, the government, the president and the opposition, and we hear different things, but the result is clear. The future of Ukrainians becomes a hostage of political clash in this country, and unfortunately we cannot address it as the European Union in the proper way. What we should do is to hear to real, actual representatives of Ukrainians, and they are representatives of NGOs, civil society, extremely vital in this country, people who don't want to involve themselves into politics, but they want to be active. And we have a very good example. We have a letter which I have distributed among you of three main Ukrainian figures, Madam Aliona Giedmanczuk, Mr. Alexander Sushka and Valery Chali. This letter was also subscribed by more than 50 persons, also very well-known leaders of public opinion. And their position is clear. They want to sign up association agreement, and they treat it not as a gift to any authorities in Ukraine, but as a tool for Ukrainians, for civil society, and on the other side, for the European Union to press on the government to make reforms. So, once more, it is not a gift to anybody, it is a tool. And we must not wait until November. There is no time for Ukraine to lose. There is no time for the European Union to lose. There is time for Ukrainians to call for their rights. They need association agreement as soon as possible, in the beginning of next year. Let's help Ukrainians, let's enable to fulfill their dream about European integration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I call Mr. Marek SIWIEC.
Wybory to jest przeszłość.
The elections are over, and this is a beauty contest in a way. And it's never a beautiful thing to see those elections. Today the Supreme Council has started its work, and I'm surprised that we have not congratulated the Ukrainians on this fact. Out of the 445 parliamentarians, none of them actually gave up their mandate. And we must also remember about the turnout in these elections. This is the democracy the Ukrainians can afford. Well, we may not like everything, but still we need to support them. Let's ask them what the Ukrainians think about the association agreement. whether they really like this Supreme Council, and then we can be presumptuous in our views and then set up new conditions. And I'm against setting up new obstacles, against exerting any new pressure. Alexander Kwaśniewski's name has been mentioned in this House. He has clearly demonstrated what kind of results can be achieved through negotiations, and we should follow this example.
The next speaker is Mr. Griffin for a minute and a half.
Mr. President, I was an international observer in the Ukraine elections. I had unrestricted access in Kiev to polling stations, election officials and party activists. I have seen corrupt elections, where gangs of thugs, sponsored by the Prime Minister, attack opposition activists, where council workers are threatened with losing their jobs if they vote the wrong way on ballot papers that carry traceable serial marks, where 2 million voters do not even exist but still vote by post, where, at the close of polls, unsealed ballot boxes are taken to central counting places by unsupervised officials, where the election officials are appointed by the local ruling party. But all these assaults on democracy go on routinely in the United Kingdom. In Ukraine, I saw a robust and well-designed system ensuring elections which, while not perfect, are much freer and fairer than those in Britain. EU hypocrites do not have any right to criticise Ukrainian elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Mr. Protasiewicz.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, I also happen to be an observer during these elections. My impression is far away from Mr. Griffin's. Well, we can be, in a way, dismayed because some people have been imprisoned and could not participate in this campaign, and some pressure has been put on independent media. We must also remember the way the composition of some election commissions, and this is frustrating indeed. It is quite clear that these elections could have been better, and this is what we expected. On the other hand, the high turnout and a very good result of the opposition, very close to the opinion polls prior to the election, and the fact that the new political parties are now present in the European Parliament is a token that the Ukrainians have been very serious about the elections. And I agree with those in this House who say that the association agreement is not a prize money for the way they are acting, but to improve and to strengthen the pro-European stance in the Ukraine. I understand that the association agreement cannot be signed without meeting certain conditions, and I welcome the decision of the Council that we must sign this association agreement as soon as possible, and we must reward the Ukrainians for the participation in the election by easing out the visa requirements, because this is the way we can convince the Ukrainians that we're open to their membership.
Are you ready to answer the blue card of Mr. KOWAL? KOWAL, you have the floor. Mr. KOWAL, you have the floor.
Panie Przewodniczący,
Chairman, and Mr. Protasiewicz, as the Vice President of the Parliament responsible for the Eastern dimension, shouldn't we do something more on the part of the European Parliament, being in the avant-garde opening to the Ukraine, especially on visa issues, do you have any concrete proposals in this regard?
Difficulty, please stand up.
Panie Przewodniczący.
Chairman, as the Vice President of the Parliament responsible for the Eastern dimension, shouldn't you say that the Parliament should be in the avant-garde of opening to the East with regards to the visa regime? The Parliament should go further than the Commission and the Council. Do you have any specific initiatives in this regard?
Please answer.
Panie pośle, możemy i powinniśmy niezwłocznie przystąpić do prac nad...
We can and we should immediately embark on an agreement on liberalizing the visa regime, and I am shadow rapporteur in two commissions, in two committees of Foreign Affairs and of and in Libe, and we should extend the mandate for the Cox-Kwaśniewski task force to make sure that the orientation presented by Mr. Füle should be implemented on the Ukrainian side too.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. PAŠCU. In 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. The EU recognizes Ukraine's European credentials. Ending the negotiations on the association agreement and the evaluation of the visa facilitation action plan are facts underlining the seriousness of the EU commitment to Ukraine. The electoral process is reflecting the health of democracy in any society. Therefore, when discussing the recent parliamentary elections in Ukraine, we naturally evaluate the democratic reform process there. And in that respect, we salute the decision of the Ukrainian Rada to set a commission to evaluate the lessons learned from the last elections, hopefully with an eye to the 2015 presidential elections. However, one should not be too schematic. Naturally, no election process is perfect. But from that to conclude that the entire democratic commitment should be questioned would be an oversimplification. Equally, Ukraine should be aware that the only weight conferring credibility to its declared objective of further political association and economic integration with the EU lies ultimately with the success of its democratic, economic and social reform process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Anna IBRISAGIC. Madam.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. We're prepared to continue with our commitment in Ukraine, but the integration of Ukraine, politically speaking, economically speaking, together with the EU has to be premised on our common values. Now, in our assessment, we cannot find any room for politically motivated positions, and of course we must make sure that elections are free and that people can participate. We need to make sure that Ukraine really works in order to meet international standards in the area of elections. We also need to make sure that the justice system is tidied up. Ukraine should deliver results in those areas, and their ability to deliver results will be of determining importance in terms of deciding what the EU is going to do with the Ukraine, how deep our commitment is going to be. We expect the Ukraine government to start a dialogue with the opposition immediately and to establish an electoral system that is based on clear rules. And we also expect that reforms will take place because they are necessary. We need to make sure that judicial processes are fair, transparent and independent. Ukraine has many, many friends in the European Parliament, and for that reason we need to pay close attention to what's happening in that country. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Commissioner. The Commissioner really has shown great dedication to Ukraine. He's personally committed to this country. I pay tribute to him for that, and I would ask the Commissioner to continue to keep us up to date on progress made in Ukraine. If Ukraine shows progress in those areas where I've just mentioned, then I hope that Council will be prepared to sign the association agreement, to do so already in Vilnius next year. We would like to have cooperation with Ukraine. We have chosen Ukraine. opting for Ukraine. Now it's for Ukraine to do its work and to show that, that Europe is Ukraine's choice as well. Thank you very much, says the President. The next speaker is Mr. PALECKIS for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, the parliamentary elections in Ukraine did not contribute much to the consolidation of the European choice, democracy and human rights in that country. They lacked transparency, and some opposition leaders had to face them in prison. The so-called administrative resources were abused quite a lot. But I have to stress that all major political forces favor reinforced cooperation with the European Union. Moreover, the European perspective is supported by a large part of the Ukrainian people. It is important to give a strong sign to them that their voice is appreciated by the European Union. The voice of the people and their pressure should make Parliament and the government pay more attention to human rights and carry out reforms that would make the association agreement possible already next year during the summit in Vilnius, or maybe even earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Mr. Preda.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, the conclusions of the Council on Monday clearly showed us the views that Ukraine has set on the European Union. But of course all these views can only be met if we comply with three issues: the democratic process, the elections, justice, and of course everything related to the association agreement and its agenda. As far as the 28th of October elections are concerned, this has led to a deterioration of the standards which the Ukraine had actually reached. One of the major lacuna were because of the lack of access to information, a lack of access to resources, and also because of the difficulties put in the way of the opposition and the different processes which go against international standards. I've already said this in this Parliament. The fact that Julia Tymoshenko has been imprisoned is a violation of laws all over the world, and I would also like to refer to statements of the Council of Europe, the Venice Commission, on the role of the General Prosecutor, the change of the laws, the role of the and improvement of the role of justice as a whole. I hope that during the summit in Vilnius we'll be able to see an improvement in all of these aspects. I hope that this will contribute to the fact that the Ukraine will come closer to Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Landsbergis.
Thank you, Mr. President. As usually, we like to shed Ukraine with strong criticism about elections and stage of democracy there. It's worth to compare our valuation of the same matters in two largest post-Soviet states, which are both Russia and Ukraine. So, Ukraine, the real elections were held, but still failed to meet all international standards there. And Russia, in both parliamentary and presidential cases, the very election was preventively replaced by selection of candidates like in old good times, and whose potential to debate with power holders were put aside, simply not registered. Two Ukrainian opposition leaders sentenced for misuse of powers and kept in jail there should not be compared with two extremely dangerous singing girls imprisoned in Russia. In Ukraine, the new political forces were allowed to participate and overcome the threshold, thus building the real parliamentary opposition, what is not a case in Russia, where the highest power is guaranteed personally for lifelong term, like in the Middle Asia, and only selected decorative groups are permitted to enter the lower house as an opposition of His Majesty. In Ukraine, the existing democratic institutions must be further improved, as there are no democratic institutions in governance of Russia, only imitation of them. Nothing may be improved similarly until the fundamental change comes. In sum, Ukraine is better and must be encouraged not to lose its European links and desire. The encouragement remains in our hands. Let's not delete any positive advances as it happened with a recent resolution. Thank you.
Grazie. Ora. Thank you. I'd now like to give the floor to those speakers who wanted to take the floor through the Catch the Eye method. Mr. Kukan first.
Madam Chair, I have followed the elections and situation in Ukraine closely and with some expectations. Unfortunately, like many members of this House, I am also disturbed about the elections and the post-electoral processes in the country. Ukraine is our important neighbour and partner. Respect to and clarity in democratic process must be an important basis for the Union's further cooperation with the country. In many respects, there are questions over these issues, such as the elections, imprisonment of the opposition leaders, or in more general terms, functioning of the rule of law. As a neighbour, it is our role to create possibilities to improve them. It is for the Ukrainian politicians, however, to make choices. If there is willingness to go in the EU direction, they need to take burden of necessary reforms. This could give us the base for feeling more optimistic about the future pro-European development of the country. Thank you very much.
Grazie. La parola. Thank you so much. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. TABAJDI.
Mille grazie.
Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Füle, I agree with the analysis drawn up by the Commission concerning the parliamentary elections in Ukraine. They can't really be called democratic, although of course there weren't outright violations either. We had international observers who have confirmed this analysis. The circumstances, the conditions for the election, the whole question of the campaigning and the rules pertaining to that, media appearances, none of that was really democratic. In fact, there was a strong bias in favour of the government party. I would like to point out that recently in Hungary we adopted a new legislation as well concerning elections, and in a way that also restricts certain electoral principles. There is compensation for the winning party, there is also gerrymandering, also the whole question of party delegates. All of this has been changed. Now I think it would be most welcome if the European Commission were to speak not only beyond Europe's borders but within Europe's borders. I think that you need to speak out in favour of free and fair elections even within the EU. Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. OVIIR.
President, colleagues, we've spoken a lot today about elections in the Ukraine and about selective justice. We are truly interested in promoting relations with Ukraine. That's a mutual interest. However, signing the agreement has been postponed. The EU wants to see steps towards the rule of law. The rule of law is measured with more parameters than just the election system. It includes election reforms, economic reforms, for example, and that's something that we have not discussed today. We need to pay attention to it and we need to contribute to it. Ukraine is interested in foreign investment, but they have done very little to protect those investments from malicious overtaking. Investors from the EU consider even Russia a less risky destination for investment than the Ukraine. Commissioner Füle should pay attention to this issue. If we support association, we need to support steps on that road as well. Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you. Mr. Migalski, please.
Dziękuję bardzo, Pani Przewodnicząca. Ja w wystąpieniu Pana Komisarza...
Thank you, Madam Chair. In Commissioner Füle's statement, I found an ambivalence. Like in our debate, we both support the European aspiration of Ukraine, but on the other hand, we cannot talk about their problems in order to be frank to our partners in Kiev. We are supporting the changes. What will be good for Ukraine will be good for the EU. But we are dealing with a process of withdrawal from this process on the whole post-Soviet area, both in Russia, in Ukraine and in Belarus. But we shouldn't compare the situation in Ukraine with that in Russia and especially in Belarus. The Ukrainians, with all their problems we are talking about, had the possibility to demonstrate their people's will in the elections. They were not as we would have expected, but they did meet their own expectations. Let us therefore support them and make sure that their European aspirations come true.
Parola. Thank you. I'd like to call on Mr. PAŠKA, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Commissioner. The situation in Ukraine is, from the political point of view, polarized for a long time. However, we cannot determine who is going to be in the government of Ukraine. That's why we should communicate with that government that came out of these elections, even if we find it more sort of difficult. Then at the same time, we simply have to continue with cooperation with all the forces or the representatives in Ukraine who respect the democracy. However, we should not be surprised if Ukraine is going to look towards the east. However, so I think we should be sort of generous and perhaps more patient towards Ukraine, because I'm sure that even Ukrainian citizens will slowly be able to elect better politicians. And if we enable them the possibility to visit Europe, they will perhaps have higher demands on their politicians. Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you. This closes the Catch the Eye procedure. I'd like to give the floor to the Commissioner.
Madam President and honourable members, I talked a lot at the beginning. Let me make only short remarks, four of them, indeed. The interventions we have heard show the interest and commitment to the European Union-Ukraine relations in this House. And I'm sure they will also be heard in Kiev. Second, for me the way ahead is clear. The European Union's firm commitment to pursue political association and economic integration with Ukraine now needs to be mirrored by determined actions and tangible progress by the Ukrainian government and parliament. Point number 3. The Vilnius Eastern Partnership Summit, November 2013. What an appropriate time and place to sign such an important document like association agreement with Ukraine. What an appropriate time and place to address both the present challenges in the Eastern Partnership, but also the future opportunities, including also the future of the Eastern Partnership and the role of European perspective in that regard. And point number 4, I have no doubt that the association agreement is going to strengthen both Ukraine and the European Union. I have no doubt, and you underlined that in your statements, that the association agreement becomes a powerful transformation tool to the benefit of Ukrainian citizens. And that is the name of the game. To share with Ukrainians the same values, the same commitments to democracy, the rule of law, to share the same European future. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We've now received 6 draft resolutions at the conclusion of this debate. The debate is now closed. The vote will take place tomorrow.
Ora una comunicazione, le autorità competenti.
The Austrian competent authorities have now given me a request for the lifting of the parliamentary immunity of Honourable Member Hans-Peter Martin in accordance to Article 6, Paragraph 2 of the rules. This request is sent to the Committee of Legal Affairs.
Ora le dichiarazioni del Consiglio.
And now we move on to the next item, the Council and Commission statements on the 2012 Progress Report on Albania. I'd like to give the floor on behalf of Council to the Minister Kozakou.
Thank you, Madam President, honourable members. I welcome the opportunity to participate in this debate this evening. Albania is an important country in the region. We cooperate widely with Albania in a range of areas and conduct extensive political dialogue. Our relations are gaining in importance, reflecting the significant and growing role of Albania in the region. It is fully involved, in particular, in regional initiatives such as the Regional Cooperation Council and the South East European Cooperation Process. Furthermore, Albania chaired the Council of Ministers of the Council of Europe during 2012. I would like to thank the Parliament for its valuable contribution to this debate, and in particular extend my appreciation to the rapporteur, Nikolaos Chountis, for his valuable work. I think there is a great deal on which the Council and the Parliament can agree. In its conclusions adopted last night, the Council welcomed the progress made by Albania to meet the 12 key priorities that were outlined in the Commission's opinion of 2010. Dialogue between the government and the opposition has improved significantly, paving the way for the progress needed to fulfil the political criteria for membership of the European Union. Albania has met 4 of the key priorities and is well on the way to meeting 2 more. These cover in particular the areas of the functioning of the Parliament, electoral reform and public administration reform. Progress has also been achieved in other areas which remain as priorities. For example, the lifting of immunities for high-level public officials and judges and an increase in seizures of criminal assets. The Council has taken note of the Commission's recommendation to grant candidate status subject to completion of key measures in the areas of judicial and public administration reform and revision of the parliamentary rules of procedure. With a view to deciding whether to grant candidate status, the Commission has been asked to report as soon as necessary progress has been achieved, also taking into account further action by Albania to fight corruption and organised crime. There are other areas where we need to see further efforts from Albania. These include rule of law issues, strengthening the independence of the judiciary, its efficiency and accountability, and the protection of minorities. These are all central to the country's path towards the European Union. Madam President, honourable members, allow me to close by referring to next year's parliamentary elections.